My publicly insulted my late father while I covered wedding costs, so I cancelled everything, exposed their lies, and took back what was mine. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my adult life, I believed respect wasn't something you demanded, it was something you earned by staying calm, generous, and responsible, especially when other people weren't. That belief shaped almost every decision I made, even the ones that quietly drained me. I thought if I showed enough patience, people would eventually see my intentions and meet me halfway. I was wrong more times than I can count, but I didn't realize that yet. I met my fiancée 3 years ago through mutual friends, and from the start, everything felt steady. She was warm, practical, and talked a lot about family and doing things the right way. We dated for a while before getting engaged, and once we did, the wedding plans exploded overnight. One conversation turned into venue tours, guest lists, and just quick decisions that suddenly involved both families. It felt like we went from engaged to overwhelmed in a matter of weeks. My dad passed away when I was younger, and that loss hardened me early. Without him around, I learned to carry responsibility quietly and not complain. He taught me, without meaning to, that you show love by providing and staying composed, even when it hurts. That mindset followed me straight into wedding planning, especially when my future mother-in-law entered the picture. She was blunt, obsessed with appearances, and had a way of talking that felt like criticism wrapped in a smile. "I'm just being honest," she'd say, shrugging. I told myself it was cultural, that I just needed thicker skin. When costs started piling up, I stepped in without much discussion: venue deposits, catering, decorations, telling myself it was easier to keep the peace and prove I was serious. I genuinely believed that if I stayed patient, paid my share and then some, and never raised my voice, I'd eventually earn her respect. I didn't see it yet, but that belief was about to be tested in a way I never expected, and once it was, there would be no going back. Once the wedding planning officially started, the money conversations stopped being conversations at all. They became assumptions. My future mother-in-law would casually say things like, "We'll go with the premium package, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event," and then glance at me like the decision was already made. My fiancé would squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "We'll figure it out later." I nodded every time, even when my chest tightened. At first, I told myself it made sense. I had a stable job. I had savings. Her parents talked a big game about helping where they could, but it always came with conditions or vague promises. So when deposits were due, I paid them. When vendors needed confirmation, my card went down. Venue. Catering. Decor. Photographer. Each payment felt small on its own, but together they started eating away at everything I'd built. I remember sitting at my laptop late at night, bank statements glowing in the dark, doing mental math I didn't want to do. It's temporary, I told myself. This is what stepping up looks like. My fiancé would reassure me, brushing my arm and saying, "My mom is just stressed. Once the wedding is over, things will calm down." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. What bothered me wasn't just the money, it was how invisible I felt while spending it. Her mother would brag to relatives about the wedding we're planning, like I was a background detail. When I gently mentioned costs once, she laughed and said, "Well, a real man provides, right?" Everyone chuckled. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I didn't talk about it to anyone. Losing my dad taught me to internalize pressure, to be the steady one. So I swallowed my discomfort and kept paying, convinced that endurance would eventually be rewarded. That if I proved myself long enough, I'd be accepted as family. But the more I gave, the more they took, and somewhere in the middle of all those payments, I started to feel like I wasn't buying a wedding anymore. I was buying my place in a family that didn't see me at all. And I still hadn't realized how far they were willing to push that belief. The night it happened was supposed to be harmless. A pre-wedding dinner at a mid-range restaurant, both families finally together in the same room, fake smiles stretched tight over polite conversation. The place smelled like grilled meat and garlic butter, plates clinking, waiters weaving between tables. I remember thinking that if I just got through this evening without tension, maybe things really would settle down. My future mother-in-law was holding court, loud and confident, telling stories about weddings she'd attended, people she knew, standards she expected. I sat there nodding, my fiancée beside me, her knee pressed against mine under the table. I was halfway through my drink when she laughed suddenly and said, "Well, at least we're doing better than some people." She turned toward me, smiling. "No offense," she added quickly, "but if your father were around, maybe you'd have had a better example of how these things work." The table went silent. Forks froze mid-air. I felt the words hit me before I fully understood them, like something cold sinking into my chest. My ears rang. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. Someone let out an awkward laugh. Another person cleared their throat. My fiancée didn't say anything. She just stared at her plate. I finally managed, "What do you mean by that?" My voice sounded calm, which almost scared me more. My future mother-in-law shrugged. "I'm just saying, kids need fathers. It explains a lot." She waved her hand like she was commenting on the weather. "You turned out fine, all things considered." All things considered. My dad's death. The years of figuring life out alone. The responsibility I carried because he wasn't there. It all flashed through me at once, hot and sharp. I felt my face burn, my hands shaking under the table. I looked at my fiancée, waiting, begging, for her to say something. Anything. She finally murmured, "Mom, you didn't have to say it like that." That was it. No defense. No apology. The conversation slowly restarted around us, but I wasn't there anymore. I was stuck on that sentence, replaying it over and over, realizing something awful in real time. This wasn't a joke that landed wrong. It was something she'd been holding back, waiting to say. And the worst part wasn't what she said about my father. It was the way everyone let it happen. The rest of that dinner felt like sitting underwater. Voices sounded muffled, laughter too loud and too forced, like everyone was desperate to pretend nothing had happened. Plates kept arriving, food I couldn't taste, my fork moving out of habit more than hunger. Every few minutes, my future mother-in-law would glance at me, not apologetic, almost satisfied. Like she'd said something that had been waiting to be said. I barely spoke. My fiancé leaned over once and whispered, "Please don't make a scene." That sentence hurt more than the insult itself. Not "Are you okay?" Not "That was wrong." Just a quiet request to keep things smooth for everyone else. I nodded, because that's what I always did, absorb the discomfort so no one else had to feel it. When dinner finally ended, relatives hugged goodbye like nothing was off. One aunt squeezed my arm and said, "She's just old-fashioned, don't take it personally." Another uncle avoided eye contact completely. Nobody addressed the comment directly. Nobody acknowledged my dad. The silence followed me all the way to the car. As soon as the doors closed, I said, "That crossed a line." My voice cracked despite my effort to stay composed. She talked about my father like he was a failure. My fiancée sighed, staring out the window. "You know how she is," she said. She didn't mean it like that. How did she mean it, then? I asked. She's stressed. Weddings bring out the worst in people. She paused, then added, "Can you just, let it go? Let it go." Like it was a bad joke. Like it wasn't my dad being reduced to a punchline. I felt something shift inside me, small, but irreversible. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past, and I started replaying old moments I'd brushed off before. The comments about money. About status. About how I was lucky to marry into their family. That night, I lay awake listening to my fiancé's breathing, staring at the ceiling. The patience I'd always been proud of suddenly felt like cowardice. I realized I'd been quiet not because I was strong, but because I was scared of rocking the boat. And for the first time, a question crept in that I couldn't push away. If this was how they spoke about my father now, what would they feel entitled to say, or take, once I was officially family? I didn't sleep much that night. My head kept looping the same thoughts, like a scratched record I couldn't lift the needle from. By morning, the hurt had turned into something sharper, unease. So instead of going to work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up every wedding-related email, contract, and receipt I could find. I told myself I was just organizing things. That lie lasted about 10 minutes. The first thing I noticed was how many decisions I hadn't actually been part of. Vendor emails addressed to my future mother-in-law. Packages upgraded without my approval. Notes like, confirmed with bride's family on contracts I was paying for. My stomach tightened as I scrolled. This wasn't sloppy planning. This was deliberate. Then I found the messages. An email chain from the venue manager, thanking her family for generously covering the full cost of the celebration. Another message referencing their budget limits I had never agreed to, because I was the one quietly covering the gaps. My hands started shaking as I read line after line, realizing how I was being presented behind my back. I heard my fiancée move in the bedroom and quickly shut the laptop, my heart racing. Later, when I asked her casually, "What have your parents been telling vendors about payments?" she froze for half a second too long. "They just talk," she said. "You know how my mom is." That pause told me everything. I reopened the emails once she left and went deeper, pulling up text backups I hadn't looked at in months. That's when I saw it, messages between my future mother-in-law and relatives, complaining about me. Calling me cheap. Saying I was lucky they were willing to help at all. Painting herself as the one holding everything together financially. I felt something inside me snap into place. All the comments. The entitlement. The insult about my father. It wasn't random cruelty, it was positioning. She was rewriting the story so that no matter how much I gave, I would always look like the one falling short. I sat there in the quiet apartment, laptop humming, sunlight spilling across the floor, and realized the truth: my generosity wasn't earning respect. It was being used as a tool. And once I saw that clearly, there was no unseeing it. Despite everything I'd uncovered, a part of me still wanted to believe this could be fixed with a conversation. That if I laid everything out calmly, facts, numbers, receipts, someone would finally acknowledge the truth. So I asked for a family meeting. Neutral ground. No yelling. No ambushes. Just clarity. My fiancée agreed, though her voice carried more reluctance than support. We met at her parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. The living room was immaculate, like a showroom no one actually lived in. I sat on the edge of the couch with a folder in my hands, papers neatly organized, my heart pounding harder than it should have. Her mother crossed her arms before I even spoke. "I just want to clear up some misunderstandings," I started, forcing my voice to stay steady. I slid the receipts across the coffee table. "These are the payments I've made so far. Venues, vendors, deposits. I need to understand why people think your family is covering everything." She didn't even look down. She laughed. "Are you keeping score now?" "I'm asking for honesty," I said. "And respect." That's when she snapped. She accused me of being ungrateful, of embarrassing her by questioning her in her own home. "You think money makes you important," she spat. "My daughter deserves better than a man who counts every dollar." I felt my jaw tighten. "This isn't about money. It's about how you spoke about my father, and how you've been lying about who's paying." Her face hardened. "If your father had taught you how families work, maybe you wouldn't be so defensive." The words landed heavier this time, sharper because they were private. Intentional. I looked at my fiancée, waiting. She stared at her hands. "I think everyone's just emotional," she said quietly. "Can we not do this right now?" That was it. No defense. No line drawn. Just avoidance. I gathered the papers slowly, my hands numb. In that moment, something painful became undeniable. I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking the wrong people. As I stood to leave, my future mother-in-law muttered, "This attitude is exactly why people talk." And walking out of that house, I realized I wasn't walking toward a resolution, I was walking straight toward a breaking point I could no longer stop. I don't remember the drive home. I know I made it back because my car was in the driveway, but everything in between feels like static. My body moved on autopilot while my mind lagged somewhere behind, replaying her words over and over. "If your father had taught you." That sentence burrowed into me deeper than I wanted to admit. I walked into the apartment and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my jacket. The silence was crushing. No music. No TV. Just the hum of the fridge in the next room and my own uneven breathing. I pulled up my banking app again, even though I already knew the numbers. Seeing them drop so low felt like confirmation of something I'd been refusing to say out loud. I had given too much of myself to people who didn't even like me. For the first time, I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The grief for my dad. The anger at being spoken to like I was disposable. The humiliation of realizing I'd been funding my own disrespect. My chest felt tight, like there was a weight sitting on it, and no matter how deeply I inhaled, it wouldn't move. My fiancée came home later and found me sitting there. "You okay?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "I don't think I can do this anymore," I said quietly. She frowned. "Do what?" "All of it," I replied. "The wedding. Your mom. Being treated like I don't matter." She sat down across from me, rubbing her temples. "You're overreacting. Every family has issues." That word, overreacting, was the final crack. I felt something inside me collapse, like a structure that had been barely standing finally giving in. I realized that if I went through with this marriage, this wouldn't be a phase. This would be my life. Years of swallowing comments. Years of paying to keep the peace. Years of my father's name being disrespected while I stayed quiet. That night, lying awake beside her, staring into the dark, I hit the lowest point I've ever known, not because I was alone, but because I finally understood that I wasn't safe here. And once that truth settled in, a terrifying thought followed right behind it. If I didn't walk away now, I might never forgive myself for it. The decision didn't come with fireworks or a dramatic speech. It came quietly, early the next morning, while the apartment was still dark and the city outside hadn't fully woken up yet. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I barely touched, my phone in my hand, staring at the list of vendors. My hands were steady in a way they hadn't been for weeks. That scared me, but it also felt like relief. I started with the venue. My voice sounded strange to my own ears as I said, "I need to cancel." The coordinator paused, then asked if everything was okay. I almost laughed at that. "No," I said honestly. "It's not." We went over the terms, the refundable deposit, the deadlines I was still within. When the call ended, I felt a sharp mix of grief and control rush through me. Then I called the caterer. The photographer. The decorator. Each conversation peeled something heavy off my chest. Not everything was refundable, but enough was. More importantly, I was the one making the decisions now. My phone started buzzing before I even finished. Missed calls. Texts piling up. "What are you doing?" "My mom is freaking out." "You're embarrassing us." When my fiancée finally confronted me in person, her face was flushed, eyes wild. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she demanded. "My entire family is asking questions." "I stopped paying," I said simply. "That's what I did." "You humiliated us," she shot back. "You couldn't just wait." "Wait. Like I'd been waiting my whole life." I looked at her and realized she wasn't worried about me, she was worried about optics. About how it looked that the money had suddenly vanished. For the first time, I didn't apologize. I didn't explain myself. I didn't soften the truth. I just said, I'm done. The silence that followed was thick, almost violent. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it like it was a lifeline. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing I'd just set off something irreversible. Because canceling the wedding wasn't the end of the fallout. It was the beginning. I didn't plan to expose anything at first. Honestly, I just wanted it to stop being painted as the problem, to stop being pressured into fixing something I didn't break. But once the wedding was cancelled, the story started spreading without me. And it wasn't the truth. Within hours, messages started coming in from extended family I barely spoke to. What happened? Why would you do this so close to the wedding? One message hit harder than the rest. I heard you backed out because you couldn't afford it. That was it. That was the moment something in me hardened. I sat down at my laptop again, heart racing, and started compiling everything. Receipts. Bank transfers. Email chains. Screenshots of messages where my future mother-in-law claimed her family was handling the costs. I wasn't emotional about it this time. I was methodical. Calm. Like someone documenting a crime. When relatives asked what happened, I stopped explaining verbally. I just sent proof. The shift was almost immediate. People who had been cold suddenly went quiet. Then came the apologies. I had no idea you were paying for all of it. She told us something completely different. I'm so sorry for what was said about your father. That last one knocked the air out of me. Because it meant people knew. They'd heard. And still stayed silent. My fiancé's family panicked. I got angry calls accusing me of airing private matters and trying to ruin reputations. Her mother left a voicemail saying, "You've always been vindictive. This proves it. No denial. No apology. Just blame." My fiancé confronted me that night, voice shaking. "Why would you send that stuff to my relatives?" "Because I'm done being lied about," I said. "And I'm done protecting people who never protected me." She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe I was one. The version of me who stayed quiet, who paid and swallowed insults, was gone. What I didn't realize yet was that exposing the lies didn't just change how others saw the situation. It forced my fiancé to choose which version of the story, and which side, she was going to stand on. The final confrontation didn't happen the way I imagined it would. There was no shouting match in a crowded room, no dramatic exit with everyone watching. It happened in her parents' living room again, the same spotless space where I'd tried to be reasonable weeks earlier. Only this time, I wasn't there to explain myself. I was there to end it. My future mother-in-law didn't bother offering me a seat. She stood with her arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes sharp. "You've caused a lot of damage," she said flatly. "People are talking." I didn't lie, I replied. My voice was steady, almost detached. "I just told the truth." She scoffed. "Your truth? You made us look like villains." "You did that yourselves," I said. "Especially when you talked about my father." Her expression flickered, just for a second. Then it hardened again. "If you're still hung up on that, you're not mature enough for marriage. A real man wouldn't cling to the past." Something in me snapped, but not in anger. In clarity. "My father raised me to know my worth," I said quietly. "And he raised me to walk away when someone shows you who they really are." She opened her mouth to respond, but my fiancé stepped in before she could. "Can you just drop this?" she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "You've already embarrassed my family. Why keep pushing?" I looked at her then, really looked. At the woman I was supposed to marry. At how her concern still wasn't about what was said or done, but about how it looked. About appearances. About damage control. "This isn't pushing," I said. "This is me choosing myself." She shook her head. "You're throwing everything away." "No," I replied. "I'm finally seeing it clearly." There was a long silence. No one apologized. No one took responsibility. And that told me everything I needed to know. I turned toward the door, my chest tight but my mind calm. As I stepped outside, the air felt colder, sharper, but cleaner somehow. I didn't know what I was walking toward yet. I only knew I was done walking back. The days after the confrontation felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. The apartment was quieter without wedding talk, without constant notifications and tense conversations. For the first time in months, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands. And in that silence, I started taking my life back piece by piece. I finalized the cancellations properly, following up with vendors, confirming refunds, documenting everything. Money slowly returned to my account, not all of it, but enough to breathe again. Watching the balance climb felt symbolic, like I was reclaiming more than just cash. I was reclaiming agency. Control. Dignity. Things I hadn't realized I'd been handing over willingly. My fiancée moved out a week later. The conversation was short and painfully polite. "I need space," she said, avoiding my eyes. I nodded. There was nothing left to argue about. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt emptier, but also lighter, like a pressure had finally been released. Messages kept coming from her relatives, though the tone had changed. Some apologized outright. Others tried to justify their silence. One cousin wrote, "I wish I'd said something that night." I read it over and over, feeling both validated and angry. Wishing didn't erase what had been done. I blocked her mother without responding. That act alone felt like rebellion. No final message. No explanation. Just a boundary I should have drawn a long time ago. Grief came in waves after that, not just for the relationship, but for the future I'd imagined. The wedding photos that would never exist. The version of family I'd hoped to build. Some nights I sat on the couch in the dark, letting it all hit me at once, chest tight, eyes burning. But underneath the grief was something steadier. A quiet pride. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't begged. I hadn't compromised my father's memory to keep the peace. For the first time since all of this started, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was standing on my own 2 feet. And with every boundary I enforced, every tie I cut, I felt myself getting stronger, ready, finally, for whatever came next. The days after the confrontation felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. The apartment was quieter without wedding talk, without constant notifications and tense conversations. For the first time in months, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands. And in that silence, I started taking my life back piece by piece. I finalized the cancellations properly, following up with vendors, confirming refunds, documenting everything. Money slowly returned to my account, not all of it, but enough to breathe again. Watching the balance climb felt symbolic, like I was reclaiming more than just cash. I was reclaiming agency. Control. Dignity. Things I hadn't realized I'd been handing over willingly. My fiancée moved out a week later. The conversation was short and painfully polite. "I need space," she said, avoiding my eyes. I nodded. There was nothing left to argue about. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt emptier, but also lighter, like a pressure had finally been released. Messages kept coming from her relatives, though the tone had changed. Some apologized outright. Others tried to justify their silence. One cousin wrote, "I wish I'd said something that night." I read it over and over, feeling both validated and angry. Wishing didn't erase what had been done. I blocked her mother without responding. That act alone felt like rebellion. No final message. No explanation. Just a boundary I should have drawn a long time ago. Grief came in waves after that, not just for the relationship, but for the future I'd imagined. The wedding photos that would never exist. The version of family I'd hoped to build. Some nights I sat on the couch in the dark, letting it all hit me at once, chest tight, eyes burning. But underneath the grief was something steadier. A quiet pride. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't begged. I hadn't compromised my father's memory to keep the peace. For the first time since all of this started, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was standing on my own 2 feet. And with every boundary I enforced, every tie I cut, I felt myself getting stronger, ready, finally, for whatever came next. It took time for everything to fully settle. Weeks passed, then months, and the silence where chaos used to live slowly became normal. I started doing small things for myself again, cooking real meals, going on long walks after work, letting my phone sit untouched for hours. In those quiet moments, I thought about my dad more than I had in years. Not with pain this time, but with clarity. Growing up, I thought honoring him meant being endlessly patient, absorbing disrespect, and proving my worth through sacrifice. That's what I've been doing my whole adult life, trying to live up to an idea of strength that left no room for boundaries. But walking away taught me something different. My father wasn't strong because he endured everything. He was strong because he knew when to stand firm. I visited his grave one morning before work, something I hadn't done in a long time. The air was cold, the ground damp, the world quiet in a way that felt honest. I told him everything, about the wedding, the insult, the money, the moment I finally chose myself. I didn't feel shame saying it out loud. I felt relief. I realized then that respect isn't earned by overgiving. It's earned by knowing your value and refusing to let anyone rewrite it for you. The family I almost married into never wanted partnership, they wanted control. And the version of me they benefited from no longer exists. I still grieved the future I thought I was building. Some days, that loss hit hard. But it no longer felt like failure. It felt like survival. Like I'd stepped off a path that would have slowly erased me. People sometimes ask if I regret canceling the wedding. I don't. What I regret is how long I ignored the signs, how much of myself I gave away trying to be accepted. I didn't lose a fiancé. I didn't lose a family. I gained my voice, my peace, and my self-respect. And for the first time, I know my father would be proud, not because I stayed quiet, but because I finally stood up and walked away.